Thank you for coming to my presentation. I am going to be presenting. Hi, can you see my screen? All right. So I'm Andrew. Thank you for coming to my presentation. Hi, can you see my screen? Hi, can you see my screen? All right. Hi, thanks for coming to my presentation. This is designing a retrofitting smart lock for access control, and this is going to be based off of SimSim. It's a smart lock that I and several colleagues built at Project Olympus at Carnegie Mellon University. Now, this presentation is going to be covering two papers, RA 5003, a functional retrofitting robotic smart lock manipulator, which is going to cover more about the mechanical aspects of the lock. Hi, can you see my screen? All right. Hi, can you see my screen? All right. Thanks for coming to my presentation. This is going to be designing a retrofitting smart lock for access control. It's going to be based around SimSim. It's a smart lock that I and several of my colleagues built at Project Olympus at Carnegie Mellon University. This presentation is going to cover two papers submitted to this conference. This is RA 5003, a functional retrofitting smart lock manipulator. This is going to cover more about the mechanical and mechatronics aspects of the lock, and also RA 5004, access control schema for smart locks using a Wi-Fi bridge, and this is going to cover more of the communication protocols. So we're going to start off with the mechanical section. So the requirements of this lock were to be able to control the knob using a motor, and this motor would be controlled by microprocessor, which would in turn be controlled through radio, which could be communicated through using a smartphone. There are also several other more interesting requirements, such as we want to allow the user to be able to turn the lock manually, and this would be in case the lock malfunctions or maybe it runs out of power, but also in case the user is not willing to operate the lock. Maybe they don't want to pull out their phone and they want to use a key instead. Or if they're inside the door, it's actually easier and more convenient to just turn the knob than it is to go find your phone and open the app. We also want to know the position of the lock, and this is particularly important when the lock is controlled manually, because if it's sent the command by the phone, we know, and we send it the unlock command, then we know that the lock is going to be unlocked in a bit, although we still would like confirmation that it did actually get unlocked. But it's also important that when the lock is turned manually, we also want to be able to detect that motion as well. We also want to make the lock retrofitting, and this means that it installs on top of your existing deadbolt, and it manipulates the existing thumb turn, which is this knob here, like a robotic hand. And in addition to it being easier to install, it also relies on the existing thumb turn for the physical security. So we don't have to worry about the actual being able to pick the lock, or if the lock can be jimmied open, and things like that. And also, of course, you can install it without the permission of the landlord, because you don't actually have to change out the existing locks to install this retrofitting smart lock. And this was a particularly important requirement for me, obviously, because I was a tenant at the time. And the whole reason why I was doing this was because I'm kind of forgetful, and I do lose my keys a lot, or at least I used to when I was in college. So I always wanted to be able to pull out my phone and unlock the door. So this is the final design of the lock, and there are a couple unusual aspects, and this paper will basically go over why these unusual aspects were implemented. So the first problem we encountered was being able to control the thumb turn using both the motor, but also allow the user to control the lock without backdriving the motor. Now, normally the solution to this is to use a clutch, so what we do is we have the clutch engaged when we want to control the lock using the motor, the green motor, and this thumb turn. This would be a gripper that would grip the thumb turn. And so when we want to control the lock using the motor, we would engage the clutch, and then we could disengage the clutch when we want to turn it manually, and therefore wouldn't backdrive the motor. But the problem with the clutch is that would require one extra actuator, which adds additional complexity, additional actuators. The whole thing gets bigger and more complicated, additional points of failure. So is there a way to allow this motion to fulfill these requirements without the additional complexity of another actuator? So the solution is this idle gear. And for the sake of the illustration, it is shown as smooth, but actually it's a gear and with a little nib here. And this idle gear is completely passive. So there's no additional actuators. And what happens is the motor can move this idle gear, and it can control the gripper here by interacting with these two knobs. And this would be how it works. So when we want to lock it, say electronically, so if we have it right now, it's unlocked, and then if we turn it clockwise, it becomes locked. Basically, the motor would control the idle ring and push the lock closed. And then we need to know how far we need to go. And to do that, we use an accelerometer, which measures gravity. But then, so after we finish locking the device, we want to retreat. And we bring the blue nib back down here. And what this enables us to do is now, when the user wants to, say, unlock the device manually, it doesn't interfere with the blue nib. And also, since the accelerometer is located on the gripper, it can tell that this manual unlocking happened. Or alternatively, if we want to electronically unlock it, we can just rotate it in the counterclockwise direction. And then, of course, we want to retreat. And then we have an additional question, which is, where do we put the battery, the radio, and the microprocessor? And also, what do we do with this wire? So the default solution is to place all these additional supporting electronics outside here. And this is a similar smart lock, and all the additional electronics are held here, where it's stationary. And of course, we have a motor that's stationary outside. But the problem is, since the accelerometer needs to be located in the middle, we have this awkward wire. And this has been implemented in a bunch of different ways, but it is always awkward in some way. So the elegant solution, which is rather difficult to understand at first, is to just put everything in the middle next to this rotating knob. And so all the electronics will move with a thumb turn. And then the outside, which is shown in black, is now just a stationary shell, which doesn't contain any electronics or moving parts. And the advantages of this is it takes up the empty space inside the gripper mechanism. So it makes the overall device smaller. And also, all the electronics are grouped together. So it's easier assembly, but also the accelerometer is located together with the rest of the electronics. And we can see here, the accelerometer we used was the ADXL345, and it's located on the PCB together with the microprocessor, the Bluetooth radio. There's a motor drivers under here and some programming headers here. So everything's in one nice piece. Now, unfortunately, we did have to run motors over here to the motor. But these wires don't move relative to the entire assembly, so there's no risk of entanglement. So what does this look like? So we want to keep in mind that this blue ring can be moved independently by the motor, and this black ring is stationary. So what it looks like is the motor will rotate, and it pushes the blue ring counterclockwise. And since the blue ring can no longer move when it's up against the station itself, the gripper is forced to move. And then, of course, we want to retreat so it can be controlled manually. So let's see that again. The motor rotates and pushes the blue ring until it hits the stationary black part, and then the gripper is forced to move and unlock, or in this case, it's delocking. And then we want to retreat the blue ring back to the rest position so it can be controlled manually. And of course, the blue ring is shown in the overall assembly here. It's highlighted, and then we have the motor with the gear, and then this is the stationary shell on the outside. And this is what the state machine looks like. So there are the input would be the accelerometer, which tells us what position the manipulator is in, and then the output is the motor, which controls the locking ring. And it's not an input or an output, but we do also want to keep track of the position of the ring for the sake of our state machine. And the position of the ring can be deduced by the history of motor commands and accelerometer values. So let's say we start in the log state, and and nothing's operating right now. The most simple solution, and we want to change this to unlock state. Now, if the accelerometer state suddenly changes to unlocked without us sending any commands or doing any orders, if the accelerometer changes from locked to unlocked, we know that the lock has been unlocked manually. Now, alternatively, we can send it the unlock command from the smartphone, which will talk to this lock using Bluetooth. And now the motor is going to turn on, and the ring is going to move from idle to the unlock position. We're going to watch that happen. And then the accelerometer state, when the accelerometer state changes to unlock, that's now we know that the gripper has been turned far enough. So now what we want to do is we want to reverse the motor to bring the blue ring back to its idle state. And then we want to wait a certain amount of time for the ring to go back to its idle state. And it's okay if we just wait for the time, because even if it's inaccurate, it doesn't matter if the blue ring is here or here or here. Either way, it's out of range of the manual unlocking procedure. And eventually we end up in this state again, where we have the unlocked position as determined by the accelerometer. Now the next problem we had is this misaligned axis of rotation. And if we look at this relatively common Slage lock, we can see that the center of the device itself, if we were to place our mechanism on top of this existing thumb turn, the center of the lock would show up at this red circle. But the thumb turn itself, which is being manipulated, has another axis of rotation here at this orange circle. And normally this would cause the whole thing to jam. This is what it looks like with our device, right? So if we place the red is the center of rotation of the device, which would be placed centered around this entire boss here. Then the center of rotation is here, and then the thumb turn, which is shown in green, is going to have a center of rotation around the orange dot. And if it tries to turn, it will jam. So what we do is we allow the slipper to slide, the gripper to slide. There's one axis of 1 degree of freedom presented by this gripper, which is highlighted in blue, which is going to be able to move forwards and backwards along these two rails here. And you can tell where it's going by how far it is from the motor. And then there's another degree of freedom created by this green thumb turn, because most of these thumb turns tend to be elongated. And so that way, without adding additional complexity to our device, we just don't hold the gripper very tightly. And that would allow the gripper to slide back and forth. And of course, there's several inserts for different sizes of grippers, but ultimately, we want to allow the gripper to slide in this green clockwise into this locked position. What we can see here is that, firstly, the gripper has moved away from the motor. See here, it's closer to the motor, and here it is further away from the motor. And we can also see that the gripper has moved upwards. So we can see this end of the gripper here, and it's covered up here. So you can see that there has been the green degree of freedom that's sliding. And so this way, our mechanism does not jam even if the axis of rotation is misaligned. So this is what the entire device looks like with all its mechanical parts. There's a manual lever here that the user can operate to control the device manually. There are some supporting electronics here, and the batteries are in the center. The motor with its small gear here controls the transmission ring, shown here. And then we have the sliding gripper over here. So that's up for the mechanical part. So I'm going to move on to the communication half of this presentation. So this entire, to understand the communication requirements, the device was used for the sharing economy. So it would be used for Airbnb, some other sharing economy things, and timeshares. And the requirements here is we need to be able to give and revoke access frequently to many people. And ideally, we want to do it without having to make physical contact, because a lot of these owners, they own many properties, and they can't travel to each individual one, or maybe their home is a certain distance away from the property. So it would add additional work to have to travel to the device. So to have to travel to the home to give the guest the key. So normally the solution is we want to hide the key under a rug or a potted plant. That's kind of sketchy. And it also, once you tell the user that, oh, the key is under the rug, and they leave, and their time in the house is over, they could just, if they come back a week later, then they still know the key is under here. So there's slightly more elegant solution is use a combination lock. And these are relatively common and low tech. And what we do is we just hold the keys inside here, and there's a combination. So when the guest time is over, they just, if you want to give a guest access, you tell them the combination, and when they leave, they just put the keys back. But the problem with these combination locks is you do have to go back there every once in a while to change the combination. Otherwise, the guests, they know the combination, so they can come back later, even though it isn't their time. So that's, and if you want to go back more frequently to change the combination, that's more work. And if you don't change the combination enough, then there are people that have access that shouldn't have access. And this is the place, this is the part where the smart locks come in handy, because they can give and revoke access remotely as long as they're connected to the internet. And that's a very important thing. And it's easy to, also we want it to be easy to install, because a lot of these owners, they own a couple of properties, but they aren't hotels. So they don't have the ability to set up the infrastructure that a hotel would be able to set up. So we want this to be easy for the owner to install. And also we just want to cord locks. That's something that most smart locks should be able to do. Now the device as we have it only contains a Bluetooth radio. And the reason why that is this Bluetooth low energy consumes very little power, but it can't connect to the internet. So ideally, we want to be able to connect to the internet. So we use this. So we would have a Wi-Fi radio. The problem with the Wi-Fi radio is it consumes a lot of power. So right now we just have a Bluetooth radio, and then the smartphone. Most modern smartphones have a Bluetooth radio as well, and then they can talk. But this doesn't give us remote access, because Bluetooth only has a range of, say, 30 meters. Whereas Wi-Fi, if you can actually connect to the internet, is theoretically infinite. So what we want to do is, the solution is to put this bridge here. And this bridge contains a Wi-Fi radio and a Bluetooth radio. So using the Bluetooth radio, can talk with the lock. And using the Wi-Fi radio, it can talk with the cloud server, and it can talk with the smartphone through its data connection. And that would allow this connection to be as long range as necessary. But then we encounter a problem, which is what happens if the guest does not have data? And in most situations, the guest should have data, right? Most people, their smartphones have data. But the problem here is, specifically for the sharing economy, you get a lot of travelers, and they might come from out of the country. And if they come to if they're tired after the trip and they want to settle down before getting the SIM card in their new country, they're not going to have data. And if they don't have data, then they might not necessarily be able to connect to the lock. So what we want to do in this situation, but we still want to be able to give them access through Bluetooth. Now, you'd be able to think, why can't the user just connect from this Bluetooth here to this Bluetooth here? And this brings in a certain, some certain disadvantages of Bluetooth. Namely, the Bluetooth slave can only accept one master at a time. So the lock has to be a slave. And also you can't be both a slave and a master. So the lock, which is a slave, can only connect to one master, which is the bridge. And so you don't have to disconnect to the bridge and then to look for a smartphone. That creates some very unreliable. So we don't want to be able to do that. So now this lock cannot be accessed except through the bridge, which can only be accessed through the Wi-Fi. So our solution here is to add a second Bluetooth radio to the bridge. So this way it has both the slave and the master. So the master basically imitates a smartphone and being able to control the lock, and the smartphone can control the bridge, and the bridge basically simulates this slave lock, and the protocol itself is a pass-through protocol. As for authentication, we have AES 256, which as of today has no it has no weaknesses, or well, it does have weaknesses, but if you implement it correctly, it won't. And the lock has a list of IDs that will accept each one with an AES 256 key. And the users can use their IDs to control the lock, and the admins can either add or remove IDs. And what this looks like here is we can see this user with a smartphone with ID 2, it might have key B, and it'll send this unlock command. And this unlock command is encrypted using key B. And it has the tag ID2 attached to it. And inside this lock, it has the ID2 as key B. So it will use this ID2. It will see this ID2, and it'll say, like, okay, what is the key for ID2? And it'll see it's key B. And then it'll use key B to unlock, to de-encrypt this unlock message. And then this unlock message, now we know it has the command to unlock. Now, the admin can do several additional things, but the most important thing it can do is it can say, what if we add ID3 equals key C? What if we add this ID3 here? And now this lock will be able to use this ID1, which it recognizes as an admin. It will unencrypt this add ID3 key C. And then it will add it to this down here. So now this additional user can also operate the lock. So that's it for the presentation. Here is a video of the lock in action. We can see here it's got some sticky tape. And the sticky tape is a command tape. It's a special kind of tape it's very easy to install, but in order to remove it, you do have to tug at it in a certain direction. Otherwise, it's actually quite difficult to remove. And so here we're going to see the lock in action. Okay. Oh, and here's my my contact information as I wait for the there you go. It's andrewzang100@gmail.com. So if you have any questions.